Arthur Rossi sat at his table. The same table, every evening. It was in the back corner of the trattoria, nestled in a shallow alcove that gave him a clear view of the entire dining room, the bar, and the front door. No one could approach him unseen. It was a principle of his life. The restaurant, Rossi's Trattoria, was his. It was legitimate, profitable, and served the best veal saltimbocca in the city. It was also his office, his sanctuary, and his throne room. From this simple wooden chair, he ran an empire that the taxman knew nothing about. His knuckles were scarred. His suit was Italian silk, charcoal grey, tailored to perfection. The contrast was the man himself. Arthur, or Art as he was known, was a relic of a bygone era. He believed in respect, in loyalty, and in a code that was written in blood and tradition, not in law books. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, etched with lines of worry and steel. But tonight, his face was calm. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, the warm smell of garlic and oregano, this was his peace. His bodyguard, Marco, stood motionless by the wall behind him. Marco was a mountain of a man, silent and ever watchful. He had been with Art for 20 years. He understood the silences better than he understood words. A girl approached the table. She was new. Art had noticed her earlier. Young, maybe 20, with a nervous energy that was loud in the otherwise smooth-running establishment. She clutched a small black bill folder to her chest like a shield. Her name tag read Clara. Marco shifted his weight, a subtle movement that was a clear warning. No one approached Arthur Ross's table unless they were summoned. Ever. The girl, Clara, didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she did, and her desperation outweighed her fear. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes wide. "Mr. Rossi," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Art didn't look up from his espresso. He simply stirred the dark liquid, the tiny spoon making a soft scraping sound against the porcelain. He was testing her. He wanted to see if she would break and run. She didn't. She took a shaky breath. "Mr. Rossi," she repeated, a fraction louder. "I have a question." Marco took half a step forward. Art raised a single finger from his cup, a minute gesture that froze the large man in place. He finally lifted his gaze to meet the girl's. His eyes were dark, and they held a weight that made most people falter. Clara flinched but held her ground. "It's about table 7, she said, nodding towards the small two-person table near the front window. An old woman sat there, her back frail and stooped. She was finishing a bowl of soup, her movement slow and deliberate. She was a regular. She came in twice a week, always sat at the same table, and always ordered the minestrone and a glass of water. "What about it?" Artie's voice was gravelly, low. It was a voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. "The bill," Clara said, her voice dropping lower as if sharing a conspiracy. "I went to print her check, and the system, it just zeroes it out. Every time." She opened the folder to show him a receipt. It listed the soup and then a line item, standing credit. The total was 0. "I asked Maria, the other waitress," Clara continued, brushing her words now. "She said to just leave it alone. She said that table hasn't paid a bill in 30 years. Her eyes were a mixture of confusion and accusation. I thought it must be a mistake. A glitch in the system. 30 years is a long time." Marco's posture stiffened. This was an unforgivable breach of protocol. Questioning the boss. Implying a mistake. He expected Art to dismiss her with a cold word, to have her fired before she could even reach the kitchen. But Art did something else. He went very still. Very still. His gaze shifted from the nervous girl to the old woman at table 7. He watched her as she carefully folded her napkin and placed it beside her empty bowl. The hard lines on his face seemed to soften, the icy darkness in his eyes receding to reveal something else. A flicker of a memory. A ghost from a lifetime ago. He saw not an old woman, but a young one with flour on her apron and kindness in her eyes. He didn't see a customer. He saw a debt. The only one he was happy to never fully repay. He raised his hand, a clear gesture for Marco to stand down completely. He looked back at the waitress, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw her integrity, her youthful ignorance of the world she had just stepped into. He knew this moment was a crossroads, for her and for him. He could have her thrown out. Or he could answer the question. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change how you see a simple act of kindness. It's a story about debts that can't be paid with money and about the quiet power of a single good deed. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what we have coming up. We love hearing from you, so let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's get back to the story. To understand Arthur Ross's reaction, you have to understand the man. And to understand the man, you have to understand the boy he once was. Arthur Rossi was not born into power. He was born into the grit and grime of the city's forgotten docks. His father was a strong man with a weak will, a man who loved his family but loved the gamble more. He made a bad bet. Then another. Soon, he owed money to a man named Silvio, a loan shark who collected his debts with interest paid in bruises and broken bones. Art was 10 years old. He remembered the fear. It was a constant, metallic taste in his mouth. He remembered the shouting matches behind closed doors, his mother's pleas and his father's hollow promises. He remembered the cupboards growing barer and barer, until they were just empty wooden boxes that echoed with hunger. The empire Art Rossi commanded now was built on a foundation of rules. They were simple, brutal, and absolute. Rule number 1, loyalty above all else. Betrayal was a sickness that was cured with a permanent solution. Rule number 2, business is business. Civilians were not to be touched. Women, children, ordinary people trying to live their lives, they were off limits. To harm the innocent was to invite a wrath that was swift and biblical. It was a rule born from the memory of his own mother's helplessness. And rule number 3, the most important rule of all debts are paid. Whether in cash, in favors, or in blood, the ledger was always balanced. Always. He had built his life on that certainty. It was the bedrock of his reputation. A reputation for being ruthless, for being unforgiving, but for being a man of his word. If Art Rossi said you would be paid, you were paid. If he said you owed him, you paid him. There were no exceptions. Except for table 7. The woman at that table was Elena. Today, she was an old woman with silver hair and skin like wrinkled parchment. But 40 years ago, she was a young waitress working in this very building. It wasn't Ross's trattoria back then. It was just the corner diner, a greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths and a perpetually sticky floor. Art remembered the day vividly. It had been 3 days since there was any real food in their apartment. His father had been gone for a week, vanished into the city's underbelly to escape Silvio's collectors. It was just him and his mother. She had been a proud woman, but hunger had ground her pride down to dust. That afternoon, she had taken him by the hand and walked them down to the diner. She didn't go inside. She just stood on the pavement, staring through the glass at the plates of food, her face a mask of shame and despair. She was hoping to see someone she knew, a neighbor, anyone from whom she could beg a few dollars for a loaf of bread. Art stood beside her, his stomach a tight, aching knot. He wasn't just hungry. He was humiliated. He saw the pitying looks from people passing by. He felt like a ghost, invisible and worthless. Then the diner door opened. A young waitress stepped out. It was Elena. She wasn't much older than a girl herself, with a tired look that said she worked too many hours for too little pay. She looked at Art's mother, then down at him. She didn't say anything. She just saw. She went back inside. A minute later, she returned with a heavy paper bag. The bag smelled of heaven. It smelled of fresh bread. "Here," she said, pressing the bag into his mother's hands. His mother started to stammer, to refuse, but Elena just shook her head. "Go feed your boy," she said, her voice soft but firm. "No, I can't. I don't have." His mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not asking for money," Elena said. "Everyone gets hungry. Go on." And with that, she turned and went back inside to her job, disappearing behind the steamy glass of the diner door. Inside the bag was a loaf of bread, a thick wedge of cheese, and 2 apples. It was a feast. It was life. They ate on a park bench, and Art had never tasted anything so good. It wasn't just the food. It was the kindness. In a world that had been nothing but cruel and cold, a stranger had shown them a moment of impossible warmth. It was a debt Art never forgot. Years passed. Art grew up hard and fast on the streets. He learned the language of survival, which was violence. He found a mentor, an old capo who saw the steel in the boy's eyes. He rose through the ranks, his reputation built on his intelligence and his capacity for absolute finality. He took over the neighborhood, then the district. He dismantled the loan sharking operations like Silvio's, not out of mercy, but out of a cold business sense. He replaced them with his own, which were still predatory, but they ran on rules. There were lines that were not crossed. When he was 30, he was already a man of considerable power. He heard the corner diner was for sale. The owner was retiring. Art bought it. He paid in cash. He tore it down and built Ross's trattoria on its bones. A fine dining establishment. A monument to how far he had come from the starving boy on the pavement. On the opening night, he saw her. Elena. She was older, working as a hostess at another restaurant down the street. He sent one of his men to her. The man gave her a small, elegant card. It said, "Dinner is served. Table 7 is yours, for as long as you wish." She came that night, confused and hesitant. Art didn't approach her. He watched from the shadows of his office. He saw her sit at table 7. He saw the waiter tell her the meal was taken care of. He saw the quiet dignity with which she accepted it. She started coming twice a week. And for 30 years, the bill for table 7 was always 0. It was a standing order. A quiet acknowledgement of a debt from a lifetime ago. A debt of bread and cheese. A debt of kindness. All of this flooded Arthur Ross's mind as he stared at the new waitress. Clara. She stood there, trembling under his silent scrutiny, a lamb who had wandered into a lion's den. His first instinct was anger. Anger that she had disturbed this sacred, private ritual. Anger that she had brought the crude calculus of money into a place where it did not belong. But then he looked past her, at Elena, who was now carefully putting on her coat, oblivious to the quiet drama she had caused. And the anger subsided. It was replaced by something else. A profound, aching melancholy. He was a king in this castle he had built, surrounded by men who feared him, by wealth that could buy anything. But in that moment, he felt the ghost of the hungry boy. The boy who had nothing. The boy who was saved by a simple act of grace. Elena's kindness was the cornerstone of his entire empire. It was the memory that fueled his rule about protecting the innocent. It was the one purely good thing that had ever happened to him, and he had enshrined it here, in this restaurant, at that table. And this girl, this waitress, had stumbled upon his secret altar. He finally spoke. His voice was softer now, the gravelly edge worn smooth by the weight of memory. "That table," he said, looking directly into Clara's eyes. "It has a standing credit. A lifetime credit." Clara's brow furrowed. "A lifetime credit? But why? Who paid for it?" Art's gaze drifted back to Elena. "She did," he said quietly. "She paid in full. 30 years ago." He could see the answer didn't satisfy her. It didn't make sense in her world of timesheets and credit card transactions. He felt an unusual urge. The urge to explain. He, who never explained himself to anyone. Some debts, he said, more to himself than to her, are not paid with money. He made a decision. This girl's integrity, her courage to question him, deserved more than a dismissal. It deserved to be rewarded. It deserved to be nurtured. He beckoned his manager, a slick man named Lorenzo, over to the table. Lorenzo scurried over, his face a mask of anxious deference. "So, is there a problem?" "No problem, Lorenzo," Art said, his voice regaining its usual tone of command. "A change in procedure." He nodded towards Elena, who was now walking slowly towards the door. "From now on, when Signora Elena is finished with her meal, you will arrange for my personal driver to take her home. Every time. Is that understood?" Lorenzo blinked, surprised. "Your driver, sir?" "Of course. Consider it done." "And one more thing," Art said, his eyes finding Clara's again. "This young lady, Clara, she gets a raise. Effective immediately. Double her hourly wage." Clara's jaw dropped. Lorenzo's eyes widened in shock. "So, may I ask why?" "Because she pays attention to the details," Art said, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been a smile. "And because she's not afraid to ask questions. That's a rare quality. I want it encouraged." He leaned back in his chair, the moment of vulnerability passing, the king resettling on his throne. He had protected the memory. He had reinforced his world. He had turned a breach of protocol into a lesson in loyalty. He dismissed Lorenzo and Clara with a wave of his hand. As Clara walked away, dazed and confused, Art watched her. He saw in her the same spark of simple, honest decency he had seen in a young waitress 40 years ago. And he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The ledger was balanced. For now. But the quiet peace of the evening was about to be shattered. Because while Art Rossi understood debts of honor, the rest of the world often only understood money. And a man who embodied that crude reality was about to walk through the door. A man who owned the building and saw the restaurant not as a monument, but as a line item on a balance sheet. And he was about to try and collect. The man's name was Rick Stanton. He was the grandson of the man who had owned the corner diner, the man who had sold the building to Art all those years ago. Rick was nothing like his grandfather. He was a creature of spreadsheets and leveraged assets, a man who wore expensive suits to hide the cheapness of his character. He had inherited the property deed and, with it, the lease for Ross's trattoria. He saw Art not as a respected community figure, but as a tenant. And he had heard whispers. Whispers of a waitress getting a massive raise for no reason. Whispers of the owner's personal driver being used as a taxi service for an old woman. Whispers of a table that never paid. To Rick, this wasn't charity. It was poor business management. It was a sign of weakness. It was an opportunity. He arrived just before the dinner rush peaked, striding into the restaurant as if he owned the air inside it. He was loud, brash, and dripping with an arrogance that was deeply offensive to the quiet, old-world dignity of the establishment. The host tried to stop him, but Rick waved him off with a dismissive gesture. "I'm here to see Rossi," he announced, his voice slicing through the restaurant's warm ambience. Diners turned to stare. The staff froze. This was a violation of the unspoken rules. No one made a scene in Art Ross's place. Art watched him approach, his face impassive. He had known this day would come. He had had Marco run a background check on Rick Stanton the day the old man died. He knew about the gambling debts, the failed tech startups, the desperate need for capital. He knew Rick was a jackal, circling, waiting for a moment to strike. "Stanton," Art said, his voice a low rumble. "You are disturbing my guests." "Your guests?" Rick scoffed, a sneer playing on his lips. "These are my guests, Rossi. In my building. And I have a problem with how you're running the business." Marco stepped forward, placing his large frame between Rick and the table. "This is not the time or the place," Marco said, his voice dangerously calm. Rick laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Oh, I think it's the perfect time and place. I want to talk about my lease. I think the rent is about to go up. Significantly. Unless, of course, you can explain to me why you're running a soup kitchen for freeloaders. He pointed a manicured finger towards table 7, which was now empty. I hear you're giving away food. For 30 years, no less. What kind of an idiot gives anything away for 30 years? The word hung in the air. Idiot. The entire restaurant fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Clara, who was clearing a nearby table, froze, her eyes wide with terror. She knew this was her fault. Her question had started this. Art Rossi remained perfectly still. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. His anger was a cold, quiet thing. It was far more terrifying than any explosion. He slowly, deliberately, folded his napkin and placed it on the table. He looked at Marco. Marco, he said, his voice like ice. Please escort Mr. Stanton to the back office. He and I need to have a private conversation about business. The words were polite. The tone was a death sentence. Marco nodded. He placed a hand on Rick's shoulder. It was not a friendly gesture. It was like a slab of granite had landed on him. Wait, get your hands off me. Rick blustered, trying to shrug him off, but it was like trying to move a statue. We can talk right here. The back office, Art repeated, his voice dropping even lower. Now. The threat was no longer veiled. It was laid bare. Rick's bravado finally cracked. He saw the look in ART's eyes, and for the first time, he understood that he was not dealing with a simple restaurant owner. He was dealing with something much, much older and more dangerous. He allowed Marco to guide him through the kitchen, past the wide-eyed chefs, and into the small, soundproofed office at the back. The door closed with a heavy, final click. Art stood up and calmly walked towards the office, his movements unhurried. As he passed Clara, he paused for a fraction of a second. This is not your fault, he said quietly, without looking at her. This is a lesson in disrespect. Go back to your work. He entered the office, and the door clicked shut again, leaving the dining room in a state of suspended, anxious silence. Inside, the office was Spartan. A heavy desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet. Marco stood by the door. Rick was pacing nervously. Art sat down behind the desk. He didn't speak for a long time. He just watched Rick, letting the silence and the confined space work on him. Look, Rossi, Rick finally stammered, his arrogance gone, replaced by a sweaty fear. Let's be reasonable. I'm just a businessman. No, Art said, his voice flat. You're not. A businessman understands value. You only understand price. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. You came into my place. You insulted my guest. You insulted me. You did all of this because of a bowl of soup. It's the principle of the thing. Rick insisted weakly. The principle. ART's voice was laced with contempt. Let me tell you about principle, you little boy. Let me tell you a story. And in the cold, quiet office, Art told him. He told him about a starving 10-year-old boy. He told him about a desperate mother. He told him about a young waitress named Elena and her simple act of kindness. That bowl of soup you're so worried about, Art said, his voice low and intense, is part of a debt. A debt of honor. This restaurant, this building, it's not just a property to me. It's a monument to that kindness. Table 7 is not a table. It's an altar. And you pissed on it. Rick was pale, shaking his head. I didn't know. Look, it's a nice story, a real sob story, but it doesn't pay the bills. I have investors to answer to. ART's face went cold. That was the wrong thing to say. You're right, Art said softly. It doesn't. So let's talk about bills. He reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it across the desk. Rick stared at it as if it were a snake. "What's this?" "Your bills," Art said. "All of them. The money you owe to the casino in Atlantic City. The unofficial loan you took from the Chen brothers downtown. They are very unhappy about your late payments. The creative accounting on your last 3 years of tax returns. It's all in there. My man Marco is very thorough." Rick opened the folder. His face went from pale to ashen. He saw photocopies of ledgers, photos of him exchanging cash, detailed timelines of his illicit activities. It was his entire sordid life, printed and collated. "How?" he whispered. "I am a man who pays his debts," Art said. "And I am a man who prepares for those who don't. I knew who you were before you ever set foot in here tonight." He leaned back. The trap was sprung. "So now, we have a new business proposition. You have 2 choices. Choice 1, I make a few phone calls. This folder gets sent to the IRS, to the Chens, and to a few other interested parties. Your life, as you know it, is over. The building will be the least of your problems." He paused, letting the weight of the threat settle. "Or, choice 2. He slid another document across the desk. "A deed of sale. You sell me this building. Right now. For a fair market price. It's a generous offer. More than you deserve. The money will be in your account by morning. Enough to clear your debts and disappear. And this folder," he tapped the manila envelope, "disappears with you." Rick Stanton stared at the paper, then at ART's unblinking eyes. He saw no negotiation there. No bluff. Only a cold, hard choice between financial ruin and utter destruction. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely sign his name. The threat to Table 7 was over. Permanently. Art Rossi now owned his monument. When Art Rossi walked back into the dining room, the atmosphere was still thick with tension. He moved through the room as if nothing had happened, nodding to a few regulars, his face a calm, unreadable mask. Marco followed a few paces behind, having shown a terrified Rick Stanton out the back door with a final, silent warning. The business of the restaurant slowly resumed, but everyone watched Art. He didn't return to his table. Instead, he walked over to the Waitress station where Clara was pretending to polish silverware, her hands trembling. She flinched when he approached. "You did a good thing today," he said, his voice back to its normal, quiet tone. She looked up, confused. "But? I caused all that trouble." "That man." "That man was trouble waiting to happen," Art corrected her. "You just rang the bell. You asked a question that reminded me of what is important. You reminded me of a debt I can never truly repay, only honor." He looked over at Table 7. "That table represents a promise. Tonight, a wolf came to try and tear down the house. But this house is built of stone, not straw." He turned his attention back to her. "I gave you a raise tonight because you have integrity. Now, I am giving you a promotion." He didn't consult Lorenzo. He didn't need to. "You are no longer just a waitress. You are my capo di sala, the head of my floor. You will ensure every guest feels welcome. But your most important job," he said, lowering his voice, "is to watch over our special guests. People like Signora Elena. You will make sure they are treated with the respect of royalty. You will be the guardian of that table." Clara was speechless. From nearly being fired to being promoted to a position of immense trust in the span of an hour. I don't know what to say, Mr. Rossi." "Say nothing. Just do the job well." She found her courage then, the same courage that had made her approach him in the first place. She looked him in the eye, her expression earnest and searching. "Mr. Rossi," she asked in a near whisper. "People in the neighborhood, they say things about you. They say you are a dangerous man. But what I saw tonight, what you do for that woman. Are you a good man or a bad man?" It was the question of a child, simple and profound. a question no one had dared to ask him in decades. Arthur Rossi was silent for a long moment. He thought of the things he had done, the violence he had ordered, the lives he had broken to build his empire and maintain his peace. He thought of the cold calculus of his world, where good and bad were luxuries he could rarely afford. Then he looked at the empty table 7, a beacon of warmth in his dark world. "I am a man who pays his debts," he finally answered, his voice heavy with the truth of his life. "Tonight, I got to pay a good one. And for tonight, that is enough." It was the most honest answer he could give. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It had no name, no title. Just a phone number. He pressed it into her hand. "This is my private number," he said. "If you ever have a problem, any problem at all, at work or in your life, you call this number. If anyone ever bothers you, if you are ever in trouble, you call me. Do you understand?" Clara stared at the card. She understood. This was not a business card. It was a shield. An offer of absolute protection from one of the city's most powerful and feared men. It was a promise. She nodded, clutching the card tightly. "Yes, Mr. Rossi. I understand." He gave a single, curt nod, the matter settled. The crisis was over. The promise was secured. The future of his quiet monument was safe. He turned and walked back to his table in the corner, the king returning to his throne, leaving the world he had just reordered to settle back into its rhythm. The restaurant was his again, fully and completely, and the legacy of a bowl of soup was safe for another generation. Years passed. 5 of them. Ross's trattoria thrived. Under Clara's watchful eye as manager, a position she earned through fierce loyalty and a natural talent for hospitality, the restaurant became more than just a place to eat. It became a neighborhood institution, known for its warmth and its quiet sense of community. Art Rossi grew older. The lines on his face deepened. He moved a little slower, but his eyes missed nothing. His empire ran smoothly, a well-oiled machine of fear and respect. But his heart was in the restaurant. Elena continued to come every Tuesday and Thursday, always taken home by Art's driver. She never knew the full story. She never knew the powerful man who watched her from the corner was the starving boy she had helped so long ago. To her, it was just a strange and wonderful kindness in her old age. And then, one Tuesday, she didn't come. Or the Thursday after that. Art sent Marco to her small apartment to check on her. He came back with the news that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Art closed the restaurant for one night. He told the staff it was for maintenance. But he spent the evening alone, sitting at his table, staring at the empty table 7, a glass of red wine untouched before him. He was mourning a woman he barely knew, and a debt that was a pleasure to carry. The next day, the restaurant reopened. Table 7 was different. It was set with the finest china and a single white rose in a slender vase. A small, discreet brass plaque was affixed to the wall beside it. It read simply, "This table is reserved." It was never used again. It remained a permanent, silent tribute. One evening, a few years after that, Clara came to Art's office. In her hands, she held a framed drawing. It was a crude, childish crayon sketch of the restaurant. "My son drew this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's 6. He calls you the king of the nice restaurant." Art looked at the drawing. In the corner, there was a stick figure of a man with grey hair sitting at a table. Next to him was another table with a flower on it. He took the drawing without a word and hung it on the wall of his office, right next to the framed deed for the building. It was his most prized possession. A deed won through intimidation, and a picture given in love. The two sides of his life, hanging side by side. His kingdom and his heart. True wealth is not measured in dollars or in the size of one's empire. It is measured in loyalty, in memory, and in the promises we keep. A single, forgotten act of kindness, a gift of bread to a hungry child, can echo through a lifetime. It can become the foundation upon which a man builds his entire world, a secret compass that guides his soul. It proves that even in the hardest of men, there can be a quiet, sacred place, a reserved table, for a debt that is never truly paid, but is honored forever.